Hello, people. I am Jaya, and I am from Indonesia. I never believed in the supernatural. I grew up in a small village nestled in the dense forests of West Java, where our elders whispered stories of restless spirits, creatures like the Pokong, the Kuntilanak, and the Wewe Gombo. But they were just stories, right? At least, that's what I told myself. It was on a typical hunting trip with my older brother, Agus, that I realized how wrong I had been. We ventured deep into the forest, the air thick with humidity and the smell of wet earth. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the trees, but we were determined to catch something before nightfall. Agus was more cautious, always worried about the stories of things that roam the forest after dark. I laughed him off, dismissing his warnings. "There's nothing out here but game," I said, trying to convince myself more than him. But the deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to press in on us. The usual sounds of wildlife, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets, had vanished. Instead, there was a heavy, suffocating silence that weighed down on my chest. Agus's unease grew, but I urged him to keep moving. I wasn't about to let some old folk tale scare me off. Then we saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, barely visible in the dying light. I thought it was just another tree or a fallen log, but as we got closer, my stomach dropped. There was something wrong about it. Something wrong about the way it stood there, motionless. It was pale, almost ghostly white, wrapped head to toe in what looked like a burial shroud. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, but I dismissed it as my imagination. It was just another ghost story. Until it moved. At first, it was a small, jerky hop, then another, and another. The creature's legs twitched unnaturally, dragging its body forward with an almost mechanical movement. The moonlight glinted off its white shroud, casting eerie shadows over its face, but its eyes, those hollow, black eyes, were the worst part. They stared at us, unblinking, empty as if it was waiting, watching. My breath hitched in my chest. "Agus," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Do you see that?" Agus was frozen beside me, his eyes wide with fear. "Pokong," he murmured, almost to himself. "We need to go, now." But it was too late. The creature had already seen us. I pulled Agus back, urging him to run, but the thing was already moving toward us, hopping, dragging itself closer with a terrifying speed. The air grew cold, a deep, suffocating chill that numbed my bones. Agus stumbled and I caught him, pulling him up. But as I did, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of something tearing, like the ripping of cloth. The Pokong was closer now, its shroud fluttering as it moved. "Run!" Agus screamed. "Run! It will catch us!" We sprinted through the trees, but the creature's hopping grew louder, more frantic, and with each hop it drew closer. Its hollow eyes glowed, the black pit swallowing the light around it. The air felt thick, oppressive. My chest burned as if I couldn't draw enough breath, and I heard a scraping sound at my heels, slow, deliberate, like claws dragging over stone. I dared a glance behind me. The Pokong was closer, but it wasn't just hopping anymore. It was dragging itself forward with a sickening slowness, but each movement was punctuated by a soft click, the sound of bones grinding together. Its body seemed to twitch and spasm in the dark, as if it were struggling to maintain its form. But then something more horrifying happened. The creature stopped, and then it did something I'll never forget. It tilted its head, not a natural movement, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle, a cracking sound filling the air. And then it grinned, a wide, grotesque grin, a grin that stretched far beyond the limits of human anatomy, the skin of its face tearing, exposing dark, rotting flesh beneath. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and then, in a heartbeat, it lunged. It wasn't the swift, jerky hops anymore. The Pokong was moving incredibly fast now, propelled by some malevolent force. Agu screamed, his voice high and terrified, as he stumbled and fell. I turned to help him, but in that instant I saw it. The thing's arms reached out, thin, bony fingers with sharp, black nails that seemed to elongate as they grasped at Agus's leg. I heard a wet sound, like something tearing, and then I saw it. The Pokong's fingers dug into Agus's flesh. It was pulling him closer, dragging him across the ground, but not to consume him. No, the creature wasn't hungry. It was torturing him. Its hands wrapped tighter around his leg, and I watched in horror as the shroud seemed to tighten around him like a vice, suffocating him. His screams turned into desperate gasps, but the thing didn't care. It loved the fear. It thrived on it. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, as the thing slowly pulled Agus into the shadows. I could see his face contorted in pain, his mouth open as if he were pleading for mercy. But there was none. I was frozen. I couldn't help him. I couldn't do anything but watch as the Pokong tortured him, dragging him into the darkness, the sound of his cries fading with each hop the creature took. The air was thick with the scent of death, and I could feel the oppressive weight of it pressing down on me. And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, it stopped. The air grew deathly still again. The only sound left was my own ragged breathing. I didn't look back. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, through the forest, through the night, until I finally broke free. I don't know how long I ran. Hours? Minutes? Time had no meaning. When I finally made it to the edge of the village, I collapsed, gasping for air, my body shaking uncontrollably. Agus was gone. I never saw him again. I rushed back home and my dad asked where my brother was, but I remained silent from the horror I just witnessed. The elders say the Pokong doesn't just kill, it tortures its victims, dragging them between life and death, feeding on their terror, suffocating them slowly, until their bodies can't take it anymore. I barely escaped the forest that night. The memory of the Pokong, its hollow eyes, and the way it dragged my brother into the darkness still haunts me. I couldn't sleep that night. The village was quiet, too quiet, as if the very air around me was holding its breath, waiting. My body ached from the terror, but I couldn't rest. I could still hear the scraping sound of the Pokong's dragging feet, feel its cold, hollow presence stalking me from the trees. I knew I wouldn't be safe until I faced it, until I could somehow rid myself of the fear. But I was wrong. The next night, after the sun had set and the village had settled into its uneasy silence, I found myself restless again. I thought maybe I could find some peace, so I decided to take a walk through the forest. I didn't want to go back to where I'd seen the Pokong, but I couldn't shake the pull, the feeling that there was something I still needed to understand. Some part of me thought I could face whatever lingered there. I had no idea how wrong I was. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the silence pressed in on me again, like a weight on my chest. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving me with only the faintest light. It felt like the trees were closing in, suffocating me once more. I tried to push the thoughts of Agus, of the Pokong, out of my mind, but I couldn't. Every step I took felt heavier, like something, or someone, was watching me. And then I heard it. A voice. Software whispering. "Help me." I froze. I knew that voice. It was the same voice I had heard the night before, back when I had followed the Pokong into the woods. But this time, the voice was more urgent, more desperate. I hesitated, but something, some twisted instinct, drew me forward. The voice was closer now, coming from the darkness of the forest. It sounded human, a woman's voice. I couldn't ignore it. "Please help me." I pushed through the thick undergrowth, my heart pounding. The voice echoed in my ears, urging me forward. There was no mistaking it now. This was no ordinary cry for help. There was something wrong, something off about the way it called. As I neared the clearing, I saw her. A woman, standing alone in the moonlight. Her long dark hair covered her face, and her body was draped in white. The eerie figure didn't move, only stood there, staring ahead. The moment I saw her, I felt a chill creep down my spine. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. The woman's voice came again, but now it was different. There was no pleading. It was a hiss, a low guttural sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Why did you come?" I took a step back, but it was too late. Her head snapped around, jerking in a way that no human should. She was no longer the woman I had imagined. Her eyes, dark, hollow pits, locked onto mine. Her mouth stretched into a smile, but it was far too wide, a grin that tore across her face like something not quite human. Her teeth, long, jagged, and yellow, glinted in the moonlight. The thing before me wasn't a woman. It was a monster, a nightmare, the Kuntilanak. I could hear the sound of my own breath, ragged and shallow, as I stumbled back, but the creature was already moving. She glided toward me with unnatural speed, her white shroud fluttering around her like it had a mind of its own. Her hands, long clawed fingers, reached out for me, her fingers elongating, stretching toward my throat. "Please," I gasped, but the words caught in my throat. My legs froze, my body unwilling to move. The creature's mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, as if her entire face was unhinging. The air around me grew colder, thicker, with the scent of death. The Kuntilanak's laugh echoed in the forest, shrill and filled with malice. It was a sound that seemed to tear the night apart, vibrating through my bones, suffocating me. But then, just as I thought I would be consumed by her darkness, I remembered something. The stories, the warnings. The only way to escape a Kuntilanak's grasp was to break her focus, to make her lose her connection to the world of the living. With everything I had left in me, I screamed. A desperate, raw scream. It seemed to work. For a moment, she paused, her head tilting to one side, as if confused. I seized the opportunity, my body screaming in protest, but I forced myself to run. I didn't look back, not even for a second. The forest felt like it was closing in on me, the branches grabbing at my clothes, the ground beneath my feet unstable. But I couldn't stop. Behind me, I heard the sound of her laughter again, echoing through the trees, growing louder and louder. The Kuntilanak was following me, her twisted, broken form gliding through the woods with unnatural speed. But I kept running, my breath ragged, my legs burning. I didn't stop until I was back in the village, stumbling into the safety of the firelight. I collapsed in the center of the village square, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. I looked around. The villagers were asleep, unaware of the horror I had just escaped. The moon hung high above, casting its cold light over the village. But I knew better now. The night had not ended. The Kuntilanak was still out there. I couldn't breathe. The air in the village felt. "She's not just a ghost," I finally managed to say. "She's a spirit, a monster. She kills anyone who gets close." My father's jaw tightened. "I know," he said, and his voice was hard. "I've heard the stories. The village has warned us for years. But you should never have gone into the forest." I couldn't argue. I felt the weight of my mistake more than anyone could imagine. But the Kuntilanak was here now, and I had no way of getting rid of her. A low growl rattled the walls of the house. The Kuntilanak wasn't done. She was out there, and she was coming. "Father," I begged, desperation creeping into my voice. "What do we do? How do we get rid of her?" My father didn't answer immediately. He moved away from the door, pacing quickly around the room, as though searching for something. He went to the corner of the room, where an old wooden box sat on a shelf. I had never seen it open before, but I knew it had been in our family for generations. It was a relic, something passed down, locked away from the world. He opened it carefully, pulling out an old tarnished silver knife. The blade had intricate markings on it, almost like runes, and its handle was wrapped in worn leather. It had an aura about it, a presence I could feel even from across the room. "It's a ritual knife," my father explained in a low, grave tone. "It's been passed down to protect us from spirits, like her." He turned to me, his eyes meeting mine. "But this will only work if she's still outside." I nodded frantically, my heart pounding. I had no choice. I could only hope it would work. He moved to the door, still holding the knife. My mother grabbed my arm tightly, pulling me back from the door. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't open it. She's out there. She'll—" "I have to," my father said softly. "This is the only way to save him." And then, without another word, he unlocked the door and stepped outside, holding the knife in front of him. I wanted to scream, to stop him, but I couldn't. My mother held me tight, her grip painful, as if she feared I would run to him. The door cracked open just enough to let my father slip through. I could hear her now, the kuntilanak's breath, her low growl growing closer to the house. But then, my father spoke. His voice was steady, strong, almost ceremonial as he faced the creature in the darkness. "Go back to the shadows, spirit," he said, his voice reverberating with authority. "Return to the depths of the earth where you belong." I heard a terrible screech, a sound so inhuman it made my skin crawl. The Kuntalanak let out a hiss, a horrible, agonizing wail that rattled the house and sent a wave of dread coursing through me. I could feel her rage as if it were my own. She didn't want to leave. She wanted me. And now she was fighting back, her anger filling the night air. But my father stood firm, raising the knife high and chanting something in a language I didn't understand. The markings on the blade glowed faintly, shimmering with an unnatural light. I could see the kuntilanak now, her twisted form floating just beyond the door, her face contorted in fury. But the knife, my father's strength, kept her at bay. The kuntilanak screeched again, but this time her wail was cut short. The light from the knife flashed brightly, filling the air with an intense, blinding glow. For a moment, I couldn't see anything at all. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the screeching stopped. The house went still. The door slammed shut, and the glow from the knife faded into the dark. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest, waiting for the next sound, the next movement. But nothing came. Slowly, my father stepped back, his breathing heavy, the knife still gripped in his hand. He looked to my mother, then to me, his face pale, his eyes wide with exhaustion. "She's gone," he whispered. And for the first time in what felt like hours, the world seemed to return to normal. The air wasn't so thick. The night didn't feel so suffocating. I felt the weight lifting from my chest, like I could breathe again. My father turned back to us, his face filled with quiet relief. "We're safe," he said softly, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "For now." But I knew, deep in my bones, that the Kuntalanak had not forgotten me. I had escaped for tonight, but she would return, and when she did, I wouldn't be so lucky. Not next time. But for now, my family had saved me, and for that, I was grateful. 2 years had passed since that night with the Kuntilanak. I thought I had left the horrors of the forest behind me. The village had slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm, and I had done my best to bury the fear deep inside, pretending it was all just a nightmare. I had even ventured into the woods again a few times, although always in daylight, never straying too far. The scars were still there, buried under layers. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding in my chest as the creature leaned down, its hot breath on my face, and it whispered in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the depths of the earth. Before I could process what had happened, the Genderuwo released me, and I tumbled back into the dirt, scrambling away from the creature. My friends were in shock, some of them crying, others frozen in place. The Genderuwo howled a deafening shrill sound that shattered the night. The ground trembled beneath our feet as the creature stepped forward, its long claws reaching for us. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We ran like our lives depended on it.
The woods became a blur of trees, branches, and shadows as we ran in panic. We didn't know where we were going, but we knew we couldn't stop. The night was alive with the sounds of the creature chasing us, its growls and hisses chasing us through the forest. The forest seemed endless, the trees closing in around us, but finally, we burst into a clearing. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs trembling beneath me. I turned back, half expecting to see the Genderuwo closing in on us, but it was gone. The night was silent again. Too silent, we collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, our faces pale with terror. I looked at my friends, their eyes wide, filled with the same fear I felt. We had escaped, but the horror of the Genderuwo was burned into our minds. We had no idea why it spared us, but the memory of that night would stay with me forever. I told you. I whispered, shaking. The forest is never just the forest. There's more out there. And deep inside me, I knew I had barely escaped the curse of the woods. The Genderuwo had shown us mercy, for now.